Yeah. Yeah, some markers. Oh, markers. All right, we're gonna start soon. So if you are in here and don't have a book yet, and if there's books left, try to grab a book right now. That way, when we do a close read, we can feel like we're in the classroom, because I'm gonna bring you into my classroom. It's slowly transitioning right now, and you're gonna be in a poetry classroom. Cool? Grab a book, take a look. If there's stickers left, grab a sticker as well. And thanks for coming out. I love it. Okay, cool. All right. All right. Thanks everyone for coming through, taking some time. This is the best place to be, right? For taking some time out of your day, your busy schedule to come out, grab some lunch with us. This is the final leg of the book tour, and we started all the way in October. Published day, it's October 24th. So I've been like kind of traveling along all throughout in Midwest, East Coast. I had a stint in California, and now I'm back on the East Coast, back at home. I do call Hugsy my home for a lot of the. Dr. V and Dr. Joe are here, mainly because of these two women in the room, and you'll understand a lot more why. But yeah, this is Teaching the Invisible Race. This is my final tour. I'm going to actually pass it to V to give a quick introduction, because I wanted her to give an introduction to me.
All right. Oh, you know, I have my stuff behind the podium, but now give it up one more time. Welcome back. All right. So I know he's going to be teaching us Isang Baksak. I got a lot of students in the room that also are familiar. But I want to begin with just a statement of our unwavering solidarity and commitment to the students at Columbia University who have organized historic Gaza Solidarity encampments, as well as we have 3 universities right here in Boston who have been joining them. We got Michigan, Yale, and so a lot of what Tony's going to be talking about today and throughout the book is this idea, right, of cross-racial solidarity, and specifically through Isang Baksak, which you're going to hear more about. Since graduating from Hugsy in 2018, Tony has become a fixture across various online platforms, as well as the keynote and conference circuits. Many of you in this room regularly follow and cite him, bring him up in classes. So you know a lot of that. You already know a lot of that because that's out there. So what I'd like to focus on today, am I okay? You hear an echo? All right. I want to share a few of my favorite memories of Tony's time here as a graduate student here at HGSE during the 2017 to 2018 academic year, where I had the honor of witnessing some of his incredible activism and work that would give shape and form to this beautiful book that he has offered to our ongoing movement. I first met and worked with Tony during the fall of 2017 when he enrolled in the Ethnic Studies and Education course here at the Ed School. You could see his cohort right there on the bottom right. Immediately, his artivism was contagious. His work with Boston Pulse Poetry with young people, which he co-founded, often bringing young people to campus, including Nylasia. She was in 9th grade at the time, right? She was in 8th grade at the time of this photo, and she came and spit a poem to open our Ethnic Studies Symposium that December. Tony made all of that happen. His love and commitment to young people most impacted by violent enactments of oppression in classrooms, schools, and communities was and remains steadfast and unwavering. That same fall, he co-organized a silent but unforgettable protest against Betsy DeVos. You see that right here in the middle, top right, top middle. Truly one of my proudest professor moments at this institution. That same year, that spring, he served as a co-chair of our annual Alumni of Color Conference in the spring of 2018, where he developed some of the most robust youth programming that AOCC has ever seen. It hasn't been the same since. At so many of our AOCCs, at least 3 that I can remember, Tony would often lead us in Isang Baksak, making sure to teach all of us its history, its power, and its purpose, laying the foundation for his forthcoming framework. Solidarity isn't a metaphor, it's a verb. Tony, our author and scholar activist Tony, knows this and has translated his powerful activism and his practice into a book that includes an educational framework for Isang Baksak and how teachers might exercise solidarity in their classrooms and schools and communities. So please join me in welcoming back the soon-to-be Dr. DelaRosa.
Wow. And out of all the places on tour, I didn't get any of that love, right? Because there's so much contextuality, there's so much history here. After like moving here in 2015, my wife went to the law school, right? And I was a teacher in Jamaica Plain, teaching kiddos in middle school, and we were doing hip hop, spoken word, all that jazz, and bringing them to Hugsy. I first got my way into AOCC, or Alumni Color Conference. And then I was like, seeing myself, I was like, you know what? They're accepting me here. Oh, it was a little bit about like combating and making and stretching my imagination. Can I see myself at Hugsy type of deal? And a lot of us, I've seen some people nod their heads, but yeah, some of us are like that, right? They're like, oh, gotta combat that imposter phenomenon, right? So I really appreciated that. Tony today, so that's my little boy right here, Sebastian Rizal de la Rosa. We have another one on the way in June, Malaya. Her name is Freedom. And these are just like moments of today, like one of my former students who's at Harvard College now is Alyssa Gaines. She was back, I like to bring this history back. Like when I first started teaching, I was a co-founder of this program called Indie Pulse, which was a youth spoken word circuit. She was a 4th grader, right, in Indiana. And she like was in our high school circuit performing. And she came to our events, came to our programming, and now she's at Harvard College right now. And she was the youth poet laureate, of the sixth youth poet laureate, right after Amanda Gorman. So I think mad love to her. And then like my men right here at NYC Men Teach, I run a program that helps cultivate psychologically safe spaces for Asian American male teachers, because it's a growing demographic in New York. And what I learned about that program after the last 3 years of running it, both flying to New York, flying to the different boroughs, going to the Bronx, like I learned that a lot of them just needed that post-2020 and the Stop Asian Hate movement. They were like, I don't have a place to be authentic, especially within this feminist labor market, especially with 80% of women who are white in the workforce. Like, I don't see myself in leadership, right? So that was that space that I helped cultivate. And then the bottom was with Dr. Joe. When I first came back in 2021, virtually post-pandemic, that's little Sebastian there, and I was her teaching fellow in the first Asian American Studies course here at Hugsy. So that's like, with so much love there in that cohort. And then to my right, you'll see like kind of my future self. Without looking, can you see this name right here? Who is this person? Who is this person? We should know this person's name. Who is this? This is Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings. If you know her, you know she's the like mother of culturally relevant teaching, right? I was about to say responsive. No, relevant pedagogy, right? Really concretizing critical race theory into practice in the classroom. She opened up a framework for Asian crit or Asian racial literacy to be brought in. So I'm using her framework in my book, right? And we at UW-Madison, where I'm PhDing right now, we get to work with her, which is her arm is in everywhere. And it's beautiful because I feel protected. I feel like I can be my most authentic self with her there. And then lastly, being in solidarity at the AERA, which is the American Education Research Conference, just paying homage to what is happening scholasticide across the world, right? That's me today. So today, what I hope you gain, there's so much words, there's so much language, but overall, I want you to just understand overall what's going on in this book. 2, Isang Bagsak as a cross-racial ed framework. So I've been like piloting this framework and theory across different spaces, from youth spaces to teacher spaces to research spaces to superintendent spaces. And I've been challenged to think like, I need to revisit my own theory because it's not just for teachers, is what I'm learning. And then lastly, I want you to leave with a method or a concrete takeaway. Cool? All right, I'm just like keeping track of time, y'all. Okay, let's jump into the landscape. This is a little bit of my own research because I study ethnic studies theory and research policy into practice, right? In Wisconsin specifically. So let's go into landscape right now. Bring yourself back to 2020, the pandemic. I don't want you to go back to the pandemic, but bring yourself back to the pandemic. And the murder of George Floyd, which paints this movement, and then also the rise of AAPI hate, right? Let's say Asian hate, let's say Asian racism manifested as hate, right? Because the unit of analysis of hate is not a good naming of the movement. It's not, right? We critique it all the time. It's not grounded in abolition. It's not grounded in what actual coalitions are asking for, right? There's people trying to co-opt that work right now. And kind of like how I paint this landscape when I'm like doing my research is like the tale of two coalitions, right? There's one that's feminist and abolitionist grounded, run by women, queer, trans folk, and it's cross-racial. And there's one being run by big names. You'll see like big famous folks, right? Big foundations, right? And they're trying to steer this movement to control the public narrative. And I'm here, scholar activist, saying, hey, I'm in between, right? I can actually navigate those spaces because I can talk to the folks up there and I'm also on the ground. So we need those bridge builders, right? To be like, nah, this is a 20+ year fight, probably even before, and follow me so I can show you, right? Because I don't want to cancel anyone, right? That's not part of my own ethos and way of being. But this, again, back to hate as a unit of analysis, we think about racism and colonialization. This is a presidential. This is systemic. I don't have to read all the acts, but these are some of the policies. Federal Naturalization Act. People weren't considered, can be considered naturalized unless you were white, right, at that time in 1790. We already know about the China's Exclusion Act. I hope that's not new to you all. Extending to the Asiatic Bar Zone. And then 1942, Executive Order 9066. Just a quick caveat around the framing of like internment versus incarceration. People don't really, when I see this taught in classrooms, people say internment, I would say incarceration because why? Now this is like dialogic, so why? I'm gonna bring this out to people. Why do we say incarceration versus internment? Anyone? So internment is used for people that are like foreign, right? Not a part of the nation state, right? Incarceration is done to people of the nation state of the same group. So if to think about it, the perpetual foreigner myth that actually hits Asian American folks, and then we think about the incarceration, yeah, they're doing it to our own people, Japanese people, right? Japanese Americans who are Americans, right? So incarceration is what I like to use to really describe us. So we're not like implicated in the perpetual foreigner stereotype. Hart-Celler Act with just 1965, like this time period was huge because this is when the Immigration Nationality Act actually happened too. So there's a wave of Asians to become Asian American. right? That's like probably the biggest policy that really shifted like a lot of Asian immigration here. At the same time, it was like, which Asians, right? And it makes me think about the crazy rich Asian kind of stereotype, but it really was leaning towards that. Like people who they were doctors, people who were lawyers, people who had really strong education outcomes, right? At that time and access. The Muslim ban, the termination of TPS, right? And then today's policy, which we already talked about around Gaza, right? So that is the landscape of what we're dealing with here. And then with that said, with that landscape analysis, Stop AAPI Hate, that organization created this public survey around what was needed, right? This is like in 2022. This is like real-time shifting what resources are actually concretized in practice. Education became one of the largest solutions, community engagement, and then civil rights and law enforcement. And there's a lot more, y'all. But y'all, law enforcement was number 4? Really, there's some things you have to question, right? Around like what was going to be put in, concretized in funding, right? I come in at education, right? And then now you see the landscape kind of pop up. Now bringing us to 2023, 2022, 2023, Illinois, where the Teach Act happened. Anyone know that? Snaps if you know the Teach Act in here. Anyone? Yeah, I said, you're like, I kind of do. I might just be saying, raise your hand, tell me about the Teach Act. The Teach Act at Illinois mandated Asian American history education policy across the state. So now they're like the first one, right? So relatively Asian American history education is relatively new for K-12 at a systemic level, right? Now, Asian American education was taught way back in ethnic studies movement in 1960s, right? Way back in like Union City, California, they were doing that, yes, in Union City, like in the Bay Area, because of course they fought for ethnic studies, right? Of course it would reverberate around the Bay Area first, right? But like the systemic like scale, national scale is happening now. And New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Florida, whoa, right? If we think about Florida as like anti-CRT, anti-education, anti-truth, anti-anything movement at this point, that is an interesting thing, right? And I think because I was a coach there and I have some context of Florida, DeSantis was doing so because he was losing some of his public narrative, right? He wanted to win something, right? So getting some public love back to DeSantis, right? And here is my book, how it falls into that. So there's a little framing, but we're gonna turn to page. After the forward, and it's hard to say because it's Roman numerals, and there's actually not a page number on this. But it says, how will they hold us? I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to turn to that page. If you're online, if you're online, yeah, I'll read it slow for you so you can hear it as well. Oh yeah, if you came in, come grab a book, please. Okay. My classroom has started, so I'm gonna be asking you some questions after this poem, and I'm gonna just pass the mic because people get a little quiet in here. So I'm gonna pass the mic to people. All right, how will they hold us? What separates a mandate from a movement are the shepherds who inherit the stories. And what will teachers do with us, fastest growing racial group, 48 countries deep, 2,300 plus languages in an ocean of dialects? Who will carry our stories? Will they cradle us precious like Yuri did Malcolm at his darkest of hours, like the Black Panthers did Yellow and Brown Power, like at the International Hotel, Philippine-American War, or like Blasian March, building Black, Asian, and Blasian radical rapport? How loud will they teach this invisible race beyond the silence outside of October and May? What if they drop one of us? Will they pick us up like a fallen soldier? Or will they stumble over a minefield and fumble us forgotten? Who entrusted them with our spices, jackfruit, and diamonds? Will they style us windows and pick up a mirror? Will they dance a revolution or wallflower reform? Will they wade in the binary or swim ultraviolet and upstream? Will they study our mountains and movements and moments? Do they know us beyond a hashtag, beyond San Francisco and Times Square, beyond the black and white binary that flattens and binds us? Can they name our mothers before our fathers? Can they even name our fathers? Will they name themselves, quote unquote, allies after they discover our names in a book club that doesn't scent of our vinegar, sweat, blood, and dust? When the time comes, will they play our battle drums, or will they steal or plant our chrysanthemums? Okay. Oh yeah, you can snap a little bit. This is a little spoken word. You can snap in there. Now I'm gonna pass the mic a little bit. So close read. This is the classroom piece, right? This is actually a tool that you can use if you're a teacher, right? In this poem. And this is how you kind of usher in to talk about Asian American racial justice in the classroom. And what I normally do as a poetry teacher, I'd be like, I do 3 reads. You do the first initial read, and I ask my students, I'm like, what's the most fire thing? Because it's middle school, okay? So what's the most fire thing that stuck out to you and why? Because I want them to connect with the pieces and be like, Mr. DelaRosa, it was that time you talk about Black Asian solidarity. It was when you talked about the Philippine-American War, because I'm Filipino, what is connecting with you? So I'm gonna ask 3 people in this room, okay? Think about that. I'm gonna be passing the mic. Kind of like if you know Hook, if you know anything about Peter Pan, that movie back in the 80s, 90s, I'm gonna be passing it like you are the pan. You're gonna take on the mic. Yeah.
I would say for me, what stood out was the last 2 lines. Will they play our battle drums? And to me, it thinks about whether or not like the Asian American identity, the individuals who fall under this diaspora, like, are we going to be seen? Or are they going to steal or plant our chrysanthemums? So take our resources and basically, yeah, just take it away. So
Yep. Anyone here feel the energy here? This table right here. I invite you. This is warm invites. We're not at the law school. Cool. Sorry.
Yeah. I think to answer the question about what was most fire to me, I look at the line about International Hotel just because I think about the first time that I learned about International Hotel. I was going to be a first year in college, and I have so much family like in SF and in the Bay Area. And I think it was just telling of how my education wasn't reflective of me. And it was just this alarming thing. And so to see this again at this point in time is really, really affirming. So.
That goes to show the place matters, right? Place matters, and you don't know what's going to connect with a student or a person who's reading the poem at this table. Okay, yeah.
Hello. The thing that most stuck out to me was, can they name our mothers before our fathers? Can they even name our fathers? So I'm from California, and I just watched Larry the musical about Larry Ed.M. And so there's a lot of erasure about his leadership in the Delano grape farm work strike, and how Cesar Chavez is the one who really got all of the fame and all the holiday and everything, but really it was because of Larry Ed.M. first to bring them 2 together.
Yeah, and it's gender, right? We even think about Dolores Huerta, right? I had a chance one time to go do like a virtual talk with her, and she would say, it's so cool that Filipinos were there. They actually started the work, right? To know that they started the initial boycott and not to be named in the public narrative and stock narrative of Delano grape strike and Chavez to be there is problematic to me, right? And also Chavez was a very pro martial law, pro martial law, meaning he was for Ferdinand Marcos at the time, who issued his policy of martial law in the Philippines at the time, right? The Filipinos were like, nah, we can't mess with this. And also you're omitting us. Omitting is a form of curricular violence. I want you to think about the omission and the uninclusion of us is curricular violence. I'm citing like Dr. So Yoon An, which is out of Kennesaw State, right? She talks about this type of work. So thanks for sharing. That's kind of like part of it. Like pause, that was like a little classroom experiment. So you understood some poetry. So this is, I told you about the tour, where it has been, people I've met through the tour. This is Montclair, New York, right? Ripon College, which is the founding of the Republican Party. What? They brought me to Ripon? Wow. Hmong and Asian American Studies in Madison and Milwaukee, right? Rhode Island College. And the cool thing about this movement is that I've been able to be a part of like actually what do you call it? They're trying to pass a policy and actually get teachers trained on this work since policy is already passed in Rhode Island and in Connecticut. And I was a part of that process. So I think I was just humbled to be part and asked UConn, Jason Oliver Chang, who's an amazing scholar in the field right now, and movement builders across. At Columbia University as well, Dr. Yoli, who's on the very bottom right. This is my Black Asian Solidarity group. And we write and research about what does it look like to have Black, Blasian, and Asian solidarity, because even Blasian folks are left out of that conversation usually. Isang Bagsak, let's get into it. So this is chapter 6, if you want to follow through. I'm only going to talk, this is like a little bit of a test pilot, but I want to talk about this and then we're going to jump into our panel in the next probably 10 to 15 minutes. But yes, bring yourselves back to 1970s, if you were born then, if you're alive at the time, 1970s, and this is martial law. This is Ferdinand Marcos, right? Coming out. And the Filipinos out there, I love my Kapampangans, right? They were out there fighting, and all the other Filipino communities, but my Kapampangan, because I'm also Kapampangan, which is Pampanga of the North, they were fighting in coalition to end martial law at the time. And they actually had impact, right, at that time, right? To the right is my coalition of Filipinx scholars that I'm meeting and building with right now. Ate Alison Titian Cubales out of SF State is on my dissertation committee, and I'm really just excited to be part of that legacy right now. And then to the right is who I want to point it to. This is Dr. Halagaw out of University of Hawaii, and they both write about Asian American critical education and history. And this is Art Nelson Concordia, who is an ethnic studies practitioner. And I love to know that we didn't just all go into the research field, right? I'm not saying we're sellouts. I'm just saying like there's still people who I look up to who are practitioners, and we work together in solidarity to make sure that we're a team, right, in coalition. Art Nelson actually corrected me when I was teaching Isang Bagsak to other people. I was teaching it miscontextualized. I was teaching it with the Delano grape strike in 1960s, when in reality, if we actually do the historiography, the timeline doesn't match up because Delano grape strike is not when it got contextualized. It actually was contextualized in the 90s. Art Nelson, with a group of 2 other Filipinos in the Pesante group, which is like a union, education union organization, brought it with the unity clap, and we're gonna do that together here, right? The unity clap is a Chicano cultural tool, and it brings solidarity. So I'm going to teach you Isang Bagsak as an actual like cultural tool, and then we're going to talk about how it actually translates into practice. So Isang Bagsak, the 1990s version, which is the movement-based version now, starts with a slow clap, and then Allison in the middle right there, she had brought it and evolved it, right? This is part of the liver view, okay? So I'm telling you the liver view a little bit. Allison brought it into the Isang Bagsak, Tatlong Bagsak, Dalawang Bagsak, and Tatlong Bagsak to really echo the past, present, and future. So now you're a part of that future space with me. So we're gonna start it. When I say Isang Bagsak, you're gonna clap, Dalawang Bagsak, clap, and then Tatlong Bagsak, go. So it starts out, clap. Yeah. And that energy, you feel it in your hands, you feel it in your body, it's somatic, right? You can't escape. And part of what I like to teach is somatics, right? That's body knowledge, right? So this stuff, a lot of what I was just looking at Dr. V's like video of like relational pedagogies, and I was like, yeah, a lot of this work is in relationship with each other and somatically intertwined with each other. And we can't live up here all the time. And I think it's hard because that's what we're like. If you're going into research, we live up here, and the head and heart, right, and spirit practice gets left out because what's valorized or what's valued in academia is this level of like publish or perish. Let's just be real, right? And I'm already feeling that now because I'm like, asked to publish in this book, asked to publish here. And I'm like, I need to, even though I'm a father, I need to publish this work because I need to one line on my CV, one line in my CV so I can become tenure one day, right? I don't even know if that's for me yet, right? But I'm trying to do it because I know between Filipino education scholars, there's a handful of us. I'm like meeting all of them, right? I'm like, we need more of us, right, to pursue this. So that is kind of the history of Isang Bagsak, just to correct people. What I'm trying to theorize is bringing this in. I don't want it to live in this movement space and just live there. I don't want my cultural tool to be like, that's that thing that Tony does. Isang bagsak. I want it to be accessible to other people, leaders, non-Filipinos, right? And when I was reading in my sociology course, I read this article called Culture as Toolkit by Dr. Ann Swidler, another out of Berkeley. Like Berkeley's been producing these dope scholars, okay? So I love Berkeley because it's been really piloting a lot of this work and really disrupting common like frameworks of knowledge. When I read that idea of culture, I was like, what is culture? First of all, I had that moment. I'm like, what is culture? Oh, I'm creating culture. I study culture. Am I an ethnographer? Yes, I am, right? And she's really talking about how like tools like Ubuntu, in Lakesh, and other cultural tools are actually being concretized into practice, into tools, right? Theories, frameworks. And I'm doing the same thing with Isang Baksak, right? That long baksak I told you about from Allison, and then praxis. If you're in education research, you have to know Paulo Freire, right? Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed, right? There's nothing without the theory, action, and the reflection cycle, right? And my theory, which is like a practitioner scholar theory, it's not livable, it's not actionable without having Paulo Freire's praxis. So these three theories are talking to each other. And then lastly, we have to have the foregrounding of like getting out of this idea of the racial contract, right, from Charles Mills, right? This idea that we live in just this race-based conversation. This is colonial theory, right? We have to go up. We can't escape ourselves from thinking about colonialism. And I'm using Dr. Rupa Myra's work here to understand how colonialism maps itself all the way to trauma, right? Right now, we exist right now, here. We exist in our bodies. We see it manifest through these strikes, these protests on campuses. And because a lot of people aren't healed, we're unable to heal others. We're just harming others, right, in spaces, right? Structures and systems are not healed structures. They're falling into traumatic structures. So this is actually being reproduced at the scale of, I don't know, but like it's at an algorithmic scale, right? AI is doing this now, right? So this helped me unpack like, okay, when I was an anti-racist, anti-bias practitioner, I was like, why is it not connecting with my Filipino identity? Because a lot of the work that I do is decolonial, right? I'm trying to go back to my Papangan roots. And people are not looking at me legible, right? As a legible practitioner in the anti-bias, anti-racist field. It's because these don't work sometimes in understanding Asian America and Filipinos, right? White supremacy, a lot of our work is hidden, right? And they're not written about, right? If you look at Takagi, his work talks about the omission of our work in our lives. So what does it do in practice? I'm not gonna go over each point, but it does do a lot. What I'm trying to have it do is combat the black-white binary, like in my poem, shift scarcity mindedness to abundance. Because when you think about like, let's talk about DE practitioner work, because I used to be a DEI practitioner too. When I went to organizations, I would look at their financials, all of that work, and like ERGs, PRGs, affinity group monies, right? And it literally, the decision maker, who's usually a BIPOC person, usually a Black woman, right at the time, because that's what they did. They hired Black women to fill these spots and then they fired them for the same work that they got hired for, right? They would delegate money, and when they wanted to fight for an equity payment plan, they were given, hey, interest convergence, you can have 5,000 here, 5,000 here, 5,000 here. From an actual financial standpoint, that doesn't make sense. Not everyone is requiring a 5,000. That's the equality, right? Practice of like giving out money. Like other groups need more for different reasons, right? When we think about like how ERGs get funded, and 5,000 is nothing in regards to actually doing programming, robust programming for a group, right? We want to do Pan-Asian grad, right? We want to do like cross-racial solidarity. We want to bring in this author. We want to do all this stuff, but then they give us crumbs, right? So we need to fight back with this framework. Embracing multi-partiality is where I'll spend most of my time, because I learned this. This is actually the one that most people stuck with across my tour. And I'm wondering why, right? Because in this era right now, people are unable, it's just very clear to hold multiple truths at the same time. People are just like staggering. They're manifesting. They're like, I live in this binary and I've met this model minority metric and I just want to stay here. It's comforting. But really the world is very much expansive, right? Identity is expansive. How we go into the world is expansive. So we're going to start mostly here, right? And this framework, what I'm learning as like a practice, It's actually flawed because it's not just for Asian Americans. An invisible race. The invisible race is not, we're not the invisible race. We're an invisible race, but Congolese folks are invisible race. Dominican folks, right? And like, I don't like using the term race because that's a US Census term, right? We're ethno-racial community, right? Let's like disrupt all of that language. So Barea talks about the black and white supremacy logic, black-white paradigm, right? I really just brought this in to combat the black and white paradigm because when we go back to the Delano grape strike, if we think about that, there was actually Black folks there. There was women there. There probably was queer and trans people there too. We don't know because it's not written about and archived, right? So we got to think about this out of this binary framework of how we teach movements, how we teach social justice, right? Social justice, if you think about it, people start thinking about, oh, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and they stop there. I'm like, what? That's all we got, right? They stop at Du Boisian theory. Du Boisian theory, oh yeah, he thought about all this like double consciousness, right? And then they didn't know that he was also a poet, right? I'm talking about we need to disrupt these ways of thinking, right? Isang Baksak helps you do that. I already covered this a little bit about like how we talk about race and racism. My antidote with Isang Baksak is really teaching cross ethno-racial histories that exist. The one I want to point you to is Blasian March here, who is a kin, Filipinx, Chinese, and many more racial identity, ethno-racial identities, a kid in New York. And this Blasian March is the embodiment of what I'm talking about, Isang Baksak theory. As it is intersectional with the queer and trans movement, it's about joy. It's not just about trauma, right? And that's why I wrote this book. I also wanted to focus on our joy, right? When we teach race, people are like, oh my God, it's gonna be racism. It's gonna be tense. It's gonna be difficult. I do not want to talk about it. But there's so much joy in the work, right? And whenever I go to these marches, we're dancing, we're having fun, we're spinning poetry. That's not about our trauma sometimes, right? So that is one aspect of the Black and white binary that we're combating. Scarcity and abundance, I'm gonna skip this one for now, but I already talked about how we did it from a financial standpoint, using Asians, right, as an example. Multi-partiality, let's jump into this. This actually was taken from the psychology field, and I learned this from a facilitator lens. Believe it or not, I learned it from Teach for America. And I know that is like, to some people it's problematic, and as it should be, because it's part of a neoliberal project, right? And I always like laugh at Dr. B because when I was leaving Huxley, story time, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back to my community in Miami, I'm gonna get a job. And the job that I got was Teach for America as a coach, which is not a bad job, you know, because I was working directly in schools, I was a practitioner, but being part of the broader, not seeing it for what it was, how it grew out of the 90s out of white saviorism, right? And how that still is embedded in so many structures across Teach for All. It's a whole global movement right now, right? I laughed because Dr. B was warning me at the time and I was like, but we're good too, you know? But, you know, and I never saw myself outside of Teach for America at the time. I didn't have the chance because they were the only people who hired me. When I applied to 30 jobs way back in Miami after Huxley, I went through this process and I was like, yo, I can't get any job. This is gaslighting. This is crazy. And TFA, like with their love, they're like, you're an alum, come with us, right? So that's why I like to laugh. I do have many, last thing I'll say about it is I have a lot of people I love a part of the movement and the work in it. It's just not for me. It's a chapter closed. That makes sense. And it's something that I want us to critically examine, like every other neoliberal project that comes out of Ed, out of No Child Left Behind, out of Race to the Top, that kind of stuff, right? What does it do, right, to hold multiple truths at the same time for Asian Americans? It forces us to think, how are we thinking about social, emotional, and cultural needs of Asian Americans in any given learning space? That's not a question you probably thought about, right, when you're in a practitioner world, right? And I like to look at API equal pay data because it really disaggregates who is receiving what and what experiences they may have. If you have and taught any Thai, Cambodian, Laotian, Hmong, or Burmese women, young ladies, what is their experience? We're usually taught in aggregate as East Asian. Unfortunately, it's sad, right? But that's how they hold us, right? If we think from a facilitation standpoint, a little mini story time is that when I was in Miami, I did this panel called Let's Ask an Asian, okay? The title already is a little sus, right? But I wanted to be in that space because Miami. Like I was just moving from Hugsy. I wanted to show up. I was doing Pan-Asian Coalition work with Dr. Joe. I came out of ethnic studies. I wanted to show up for my people. And that's what they had, right, as the staple event. So I went because I'm a leader. I know that, and I'm going to embody that principle. And I go to this event, and there's some white dude who is married to a Filipina. And that's a bad setup already, okay? Like what I'm saying. But I'm not about to cancel anyone in any given space because that's not how I operate, right? But he's so excited that when we have this 1 hour talk, he's taking up a lot of space, and we know that person. He's like, oh, but this is how it is, and this is, and I want to say this, and he doesn't even have the mic. He's just loud, and it's a small room, right? And I'm like, what's going on? The facilitator's not saying anything. No one else is saying something. I got to say something. So as a practice, multi-partiality is like, I want you to be able to say, pause the space, notice those dynamics of power differentials and disparities, and then actually do something about it. Because that rarely happens. It rarely happens. I go to so many trainings and something, let's call it a breach, happens of the community norms and no one does anything about it. Even in pedagogy, in classes, no one says anything about it. So I had to stop the flow and say, hey, pause, I'm triggered, here's why. But I appreciate your energy because this guy was excited. You know, I don't want to and we need as many people on our fight as possible, right? Which is very different way of thinking than some of my own peers who are in social activist circles who are like, that's not my job to do, right? Okay, I get that. And if there's a choice, that Spider-Man moment of stopping time, I could have done, there's many roads to the same outcome, right? I could have been like, you're a colonizer, peace out. I've seen too many of you in my family. I have 50 people in my family and 50 people are with a white man who talks like you, right? I could have said that. Or I could have said like, hey, I'm triggered. Can we talk later? And that's what I did, right? There's many ways to go about it, right? And I think that's strategic, I think, in the moment. So we went over a lot. Concepts, multi-partiality, multiple truths happening at the same time, multiple strategies to get to the same outcome, right? Pertaining to Asian Americans, right? We talked about abundance mindset. We talked about scarcity and the Black and white binary. And I really wanted to think about, as we go into this panel, what aspects of Isang Bagsak resonated with you, why, and what does it spark for you? We're at 47, so we started a little late. So we're gonna have at least 15 minutes for this panel, y'all, and then we'll have some book signing and everything like that and take a picture if we can. But I would love to now transition into this panel portion because I wanted to hear from my peers. I wanted to hear from my professor as well. But we have Dr. Joe, and again, I told you, just love Dr. Joe, who whenever, I didn't actually take a course with you, Dr. Joe, but she was our advisor for the Pan-Asian Coalition and was always just like, my office is open, whatever we need to do, and was just kind of nudging me always to do the thing. I was like, I can do it, I could do it, I could do it. And I needed that like stretch, especially when we were the first group to bring Pan-Asian graduation here, to think about what does solidarity look like between Asian international students and Asian Americans here? Because people don't talk about that, right? And that's a big conversation to be had and research point. Dr. V, you already know, I don't need to talk so much about Dr. V, but mad love to Dr. V for being here and being in this panel. And then Eleanor, and I wanna introduce Eleanor because I met Eleanor probably through the interwebs, right? The interwebs, and I saw Eleanor because I do use spoken word stuff, I cultivate, and I was like, oh, Filipino? Yes, out of Young Arts. Young Arts is an amazing organization that brings poets, singers, artists into the college higher academics and like funds their way in and cultivates their practice, right? And now as a Rhodes Scholar, going to Oxford to study anti-colonialism, snaps to her. So let's get on real quick. Let's get this show started. So if you don't mind coming to these chairs and we'll get started for the next 15 minutes. We'll talk about some of our practices. We'll do it pretty quickly and then we'll go into questions from you all. But thank you for joining us. Y'all, thank you for coming through. So let's start off really quick, really easy. What's giving you life and joy right now? Because we don't get to talk about that, right? When we talk about the pro-Asian American lens, we don't get to talk about what's giving us joy. Let's start there, and then we'll pass the mic. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Tony. Like it's truly been an inspiration to see all the way that your work has evolved. And I'm hoping this is something that we can like continue conversations on, since I'm at the beginning of kind of like the part of the academic career that you're on. So you're an inspiration, Kuya Tony. I'm serious. But I am currently a senior at the college, which means that I've just written a thesis. My thesis defense is actually tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So right now, amidst all of that kind of academic craze and hecticness, the joy is definitely coming from my friends who are keeping me afloat, and all of us who are kind of in solidarity together, getting through this last chapter of our academic career, or at least college career.
What is bringing me joy? I think moments like this, getting to see generations of students and the amazing work that they do, and definitely the student movement right now has given me a lot of joy and motivation when I feel exhausted and I see young people picking up the mantle. I'm reminded of what's worth fighting for.
Sitting next to V always gives me lots of joy.
Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, educator burnout, so real, even for those of us in higher education. But watching, Tony today, honestly, giving me so much joy just to know that our work matters.
Your word
right?
matters.
What we're
Yes,
doing
it does. It does.
matters. And I love it. Generations behind us, but now coming alongside of us, and definitely going to transcend all of us.
Yeah, and another
Yeah.
generation coming forth as well. And that's why we do this intergenerationality. I think is a core like Asian American like core value that we hold as well. It's an immigrant core value as well, just to bring each other as we're going up, right? And you said if we want to write together, absolutely, we need to write together, especially since we share that Filipinx identity. From there, positionality matters, as we know this so much in our work. When we talk about, and we'll focus mostly about anti-colonial teaching and learning right now, because I want us to push us in that way. Like, what is true for you, manifesting for you today, as we're thinking about the Asian American K-12 movement, right? Research in ethnic studies. This is for Dr. V and Dr. Joe. What is true for you when you think about your positionality? Like you talked about in your talk, like we see each other temporal identities, right? In the scope of so many years, right? What's coming up for you?
Ooh, no history, no self is what comes up for me. I think really recognizing what are our different relationships depending on our different, right, intersecting identities to intersecting systems of oppression, power, and privilege that really have its roots in global imperialism that led, right, to me coming from two lines of migration and resistance to colonialism. I'm half Chinese, I'm half Mexican. Both of those, right, those ancestries come from long lines of resistance. So I think about that a lot, and then in connecting that specifically to the students in my classrooms, in thinking about what are their stories and what are the stories of their ancestors. And we oftentimes, I got some of my teaching fellows in the room, shout out to Melina and Jazz, right? We often ask our students to think about, what is the relationship between, your ancestors and the histories that we're studying, and to be able to engage in that kind of somatic work because it still lives in our bodies, right? Epigenetics, it tells us that is passed down, it's in our DNA. And I'll put a plug for a book, Nervous by Jen Soriano, that actually really traces it through their lived experiences. So I think about, that's what I'm thinking about, all the way down to the cells in our body, to the books that we study, and bringing it back to what it means for us to collectively heal as we continue to fight towards our collective liberation.
Thank you. Everything you just said. I think it's reclaiming voice, reclaiming our stories. As a Korean American immigrant, that really, I would say, colors how I go through life. Thinking about how is it that I could go through an entire, I think I came in third grade. How do you go from an entire 3 to 16 education and never see yourself in the curricula, right? This idea of 50% of your curriculum walking into the classroom, right? That means if I enter a classroom, something about that classroom needed to shift for me and it didn't. And so Connie Chung on the 7 o'clock news became my hero, right? And that's how I realized, whoa, people like me can exist somewhere else, right? And have a future and a life here.
Lovely. And I think about like, when you said Jen Soriano, you're giving ode to curricular violence as well. I'm like, it just sinks in because I'm seeing it manifest today as I'm in classrooms, right? I'm looking at principals, I'm going through and I'm looking at what superintendents expect of the policies, right? And to be able to work with superintendents now is special and hard because we rarely get that chance. Their time is so, I'm saying valuable, everyone's time is valuable, but their time is less and able to get to get meetings with them. And when I'm talking to superintendents, the knowledge that we talk about in terms of Asian American anything, racial literacy, is this. It is so small. They're just like, wow, like what? I've never heard about this. And that to me is jarring because they're making these huge decisions around curriculum, around hiring, about what says, what goes. And I remember this past year in the book tour, one person, when I just mentioned to pay homage to what's happening in the scholastic in Gaza, one person, it wasn't a woman either, because the majority of the superintendents in that room in Sonoma were women, white women. It was one male in that room who said something and then caused the main superintendent who hired me at the time to cause like an accountability email to me and across the team saying I was anti-Semitic in that space, right? It's never teachers, it's never students, it's never it's not mezzo leaders either. It's the highest levels of leadership that we need to get. There's this cognitive stop that's happening. And then we have our youth who are on the ground, right? Who's just like, we're gonna go regardless of what's happening at the top. So I would love to hear from your standpoint, what's your concern right now? Like, I know we're talking about Asian American K-12 research, but Asian American, let's talk about ethnic studies, like colonial studies. What is your concern right now from a youth who are seeing the future right now? What is your concern?
A lot, unfortunately, but I mean, that's why we engage in the work, right? I think that there's so much incredible work being done to show how the struggles of different communities are intertwined, and that's becoming more and more and more apparent. It's more part of our discourse. It's more part of like the teachings and practices that we have. But as those connections become more apparent, the forces trying to fight against the creation of them as being visible become even stronger. So as those lines of solidarity are getting stronger, so is the congealing of the forces that are trying to prevent us from recognizing that these struggles are intertwined. And so I think that's a question for all of us engaging in these kinds of works is how do we continue to reinforce those struggles of solidarity while also making sure that it's in a way that punctures the formation of that kind of counter resistance, while not necessarily like creating two immovable forces against one another.
Let's stay there. Ooh, I love this. Your research, what are you doing at Oxford? Like, how's that going to transcend into the, because I know you want to be a professor at one day. I don't want to put that on you now because I feel like sometimes elders will do that, but as you're hopeful. But what are your thoughts going into your own research now? Like, as you're going to go to Oxford, what are you going to take from Oxford, bring it back? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, part of the reason why I'm going to Oxford is my studies and my thesis here have been looking at U.S. colonialism in the Philippines. But something specific, I mean, about the case of U.S. colonialism in the Philippines is that it's really narrativized according to this idea of exceptionalism, which is that the U.S. had never been a colonial power before, or that it was doing something that had never been attempted in colonial history. Never mind centuries of genocide of indigenous peoples on the United States continent, or on the North American continent, never mind that the US was directly drawing from the British playbook in India and in other parts of Asia. And so for me, my project when I get to Oxford is to reconnect the history of US colonialism in the Philippines to that of indigenous settler or colonialism, settler colonialism against indigenous communities on the North American continent, and then also British colonialism. And so once I understand the kind of overlapping ways that U.S. colonialism emerged from that, we can then create more kind of cross-coalitionary solutions to understanding why it's still so pervasive in our systems of knowledge today, from education systems to social media to all of those things.
Whew. you better pin it because the book is gonna be there at some point. You know, we got to get it and support the sis. I would say also Filipinos, right? Like I was just learning from Bible studies and out of Dr. Lenny Strobel's work out of Sacramento State, and learning like, yo, like if we look at the policy of the Asiatic Bar Zone and we think about the Chinese Exclusion Act, I was just trying to find myself in it. I was like, you know, you try to position yourself and be like, oh, what does this policy do to me? Filipinos were actually like not barred by that. Filipinos were exceptional in that sense. And that's, if you see Filipinos today, why a lot of them are like living into the model minority, loving their like glamour and glitz of like pop culture and like completely ignore the movement that's happening now globally. It's because of that, right? They embody this internalized like exceptionalism around, you know, we were taught English after colonialism way back, right? 1898, like when the US bases were there, brought actually, like there was, I forget what superintendent came, but Black superintendents were were there to teach English and mandated across from a 50-year plan, which was successfully done because it's hard to trace now my language memory. Because I spoke it when I was younger, but I can't speak it now. That does something for you. The ethnic memory is gone, right? And that is part of like epistemicide, scholasticide when we think about the colonial project. And that's something I just been finding out more and more. I'm like, wow, this was like a systemic design and plan. When we think about theories, this is the last question before we like one more question, a couple questions from the audience. When we think about like how to combat this, what are we doing theory-wise? What do you turn to? Like your theory, people, you're like, oh my God, Fanon was there. Thank God for Fanon for helping me like ground myself in by any means possible. Or, you know what I mean? Like who do you turn to for an ancestral, anti-colonial frame? And you can talk about it from your sector, your discipline, if you talk about it broadly. Who do you turn to? And this is for all three of you.
I turned to D.P. Stokeland and the 7th and 8th graders that I had the honor of working with. I think it was pairing, like introducing ideas from, right, Fanon and M.A. Césaire, right, Yuri Kochiyama, Malcolm X, and seeing them apply that lens to their lived experiences with ICE raids, with police brutality, and watching them, right, take a comparative ethnic studies class in their 9th grade with Leona Kwan, shout out to her. I didn't get to teach that class. I got to hire the teacher who did, but getting to see what young people do with those frameworks, they take it to the next level. There's something, 7th grade is still hands down my favorite grade to teach. No shade to everybody in the room, but that I really, really look to young people. It was Dr. Cotas Costa who taught me, he taught me the Lakota word for child is like full of chaos, but closest to God. And in that, I think in that conceptualization of young people and children, we have so much to learn about freedom. Also, another plug for a book coming out of here, Troublemakers by Carla Shalaby. Really, she talks about how do we look to our youngest, right, to teach love and learn freedom. So those are my North Stars.
When you said Dr. Curtis Acosta, okay, that's him right here, okay? He was in that room with the superintendents. And I'm like teaching and learning because Dr. V brought him to our class, okay, back in 2018. And I'm like doing my thing, doing some spoken word, and I see him, he's just smiling at me, just laughing. And I'm like, I know you. Who are you? I saw you. 2018, right? And we were just dapping up and laughing the entire time. And then he's there. And now he's in our like community. And then I think that's so powerful, the movement of ethnic studies. That's a testament because again, we realize this work is like in coalition with each other. It's coalitional love is what I like to call it, right? And he called me, he's like, right after that, he's like, we exchange numbers, we need to talk. Because what happened and what's going to happen, we need to protect yourself, right? And I was like, protect myself from what? Like I was an external speaker. What do you mean? He's like, no, like let's talk about this. And I really appreciate that lens because we have to be strategic in these spaces, at the same time unapologetic about how we show up, right? In order for the powers that be to know that we are here and we're here to stay, right? Yep.
Love it. I mean, so much to mention, but I think for me, I always turn to the Triangulation of Asian Americans by Claire Jean Kim. It means something to me that she also is Korean American too. But yeah, for me, I can't expect non-AAPI, right, APITA folks to actually study our history unless I too am willing to study their history first. And so I want to say for the better part of the 2 decades, I've studied African American history, and I felt like it opened my eyes to my own Asian American identity in so many ways, unexpected ways, right? And the parallels that we can draw. You really can't understand the Asian American experience or our history or our, I would say, identity without seeing it, right, plugged into the larger context. You can't understand the model minority myth, for example, without thinking about the African American. It just doesn't make sense. When you realize it was less about Asian Americans than it was about, a refusal to dismantle white supremacy, for example. And so, yeah, just how they're so interconnected, and just the willingness to, I think, first study other communities as well, because then it really is like the sliding door, as they say. You think it's a window that you're looking into, but actually it ends up reflecting so much of who you are, who I am.
So my research is primarily historical, and it focuses on what I call epistemic colonialism, but it's looking at how does that lead to contemporary kind of gaps in knowledge? Why don't we teach about the Philippines? Why is Tagalog the 4th most spoken language in the country, not taught at most schools around the United States? Why did it take so long for Harvard to teach it? And I think that there's a lot of, theories that I've come to throughout my course of time at Harvard that have led me to look at this question of ignorance as something that is able to be studied. Like it's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It is a production. It has a connection to profit. Somebody is profiting off of the fact that these things are being taught. Somebody has historically. And so tracing back through Cedric Robinson on racial capitalism, or the racial contract, or Charles Mills on white ignorance. And I think those have been really fruitful for me to think through from an intellectual perspective. But what I really come back to is 2 different aspects of where I grew up in my background. I grew up in Oakland. I went to public school for my entire life, or for K-12. And I think that Oakland, because it had that rich history of ethnic studies, of the Black Panther Party, and so many different movements of really being critical about the silences in the institutions around you. I also think about sister institutions or other Filipino American student organizing groups who are doing a lot of the work on the ground that maybe higher levels of academia and the actual teaching have not yet caught up to, but they're having these conversations about colonial mentality and having these conversations about the legacy of what this does to our languages and to our families before it's necessarily happening at the classroom level. And there's one group at UCLA, it's called Samahong, and they talk about the end goal of SPEAR, which is the acronym for the group. The end goal of SPEAR is that SPEAR should not exist. So the end goal of spaces that are trying to kind of combat the pernicious effects of colonial mentality is that they should be doing the work well enough that at the end of the day, like it shouldn't have to be necessary. So that's what I think about in terms of like, if my research is identifying a particular gap in our knowledge, the goal is that someday it'll get institutionalized to the point where that kind of research doesn't have to be done anymore because the thing has already been filled.
That's a great segue into any other last questions that we may have, because I know we went a little over time, but I would love to take 1 or 2 questions that are bubbling up for you since you're here. To the audience at all? Anything that is bubbling up for you coming? And if there's no questions, we can dap up, we can take a photo, we can do all the things, but I'm gonna let it go. 30 seconds. Yeah.
So I can also project too, because I'm an educator. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is taking what is theory and putting it into practice. So myself, I'm an educator, been in the classroom for the last 8 years. And thank you, appreciate that. And one of the things that I think a lot about is working with young people, high school students, and what is perhaps maybe one thing that you would tell a high school student to like think about, whether it's the Asian American experience, whether it's thinking about things that they may not be as attuned to, that you would provide as a piece of advice for educators and for students?
tell them about what?
Want us to tell them.
Yeah, so like, for example, a piece of advice that you would give that would be inspirational not only for them, but also for the adults who are working with them. Specifically AAPI lens.
I will say, from my lens, after doing like my quals right now, I'm not finished yet, but I'm almost finished. And it's been a journey. But I had to actually do the lit review of ethnic studies, like to translate to the K-12 Asian American systemic movement now, right? I didn't know half of that, half of the stuff. And I thought I did because I was a practitioner. I was hearing it from oral knowledge, which was great, but I really need to read up on the movement. I need to know what those like what each group stood for at the time, how the BSU was the starting force, right? Again, if we wouldn't have any of these Asian American, we wouldn't have this talk in the first place, this book, without the Black Studies movement, right? Any DEI without Black Studies, right? In the 1960s, and even before, for sure. So go back to that. Go to the readings, at least read bits and parts of like where each organization stood. BSU, the Chinese American group, the Philippine PACE American group there, and I think there was like Asian American like collective group there, which mostly Japanese American women at the time, how they're formulating at a feminist and like combating anti-Black scholarship, right? And what were their demands and what were their struggles? Because I think cross-racial solidarity looks beautiful, looks easy, but Delano Grape Strike was not easy. It was right, messy, as you saw with the DelaRosa Huerta omission and the Filipinos omitted, right? And in this, they didn't all want the same demands, right? How are they making negotiations between each other while moving forward for collective liberation? And I think that's another worthy study as well.
I think about like the activities where, you show like photos of different freedom fighters and ask young people like, and teachers, stand up if you know who this is. And I think, right, oftentimes, because I'll share in my class, right, a lot of very familiar, right, freedom struggle kind of moments. And one of the ones that we end on is Yuri Kochiyama cradling Malcolm X. And I'll ask, and there's been rooms of like 200 teachers who cannot name her, or one student who can name her, usually, right, a student of like an Apita background. So I think about like that activity, but then I think even more importantly, local histories, local stories, but specifically like the stories of the young people in the classrooms. Your story, I think, would be so, I don't know your story, but I think to share that story and like the ancestry that you come from, the stories of your family, I think is such an important entry point, because oftentimes, right, racialization turns us into one-dimensional characters, and we're so much more complex. And so I think always, that's something that Professor Takaki, like always, when I was out here in 2004 doing my master's here, I wanted to quit. I hated the teacher ed program, and I reached out and he said, well, just remember to always start with the stories of the young people in your classrooms. And that was at CRLS down the street. That's where I did my student teaching. And I think has been my approach ever since. How can we connect the stories of those of us who share space to the web, right, of historical connections?
I would say it's not your fault. Not your fault. Your students, I would tell them it's not your fault. As a licensed mental health counselor, I see so many of our young AAPI communities just really struggling because they feel like it's them. And a big part of, physical colonizations, I mean, that's like temporary. It's the psychological colonizations that we really have to fight. Right. And for example, like the mental health, it really sits right at that intersection or the nexus of external forces as well as the within forces. Right. And so much of what our young people are struggling with are the external systems they have to navigate through, the internalization, which is a psychological colonization of your mind, right? To say, I don't belong here, I'm not good enough. I will never, find myself thriving in this space. All of these things that they've internalized and now hold near and dear as truth, because that's what internalization is, right? It becomes a part of your normalcy. You no longer need external forces telling you you don't belong here because you're doing it to yourself. And to also realize when we do that to ourselves, it's so much easier to do it to other people who we might deem as not belonging here. And then we repeat the cycle. So it's not your fault. Let's learn to decolonize our minds.
Last thing I'll add, just because we share this background in poetry, I think that there's a lot of ways that art can bring out a different language than the way that you're usually speaking it. Like it can access your mind at an angle at which you don't even know you're capable of speaking at until you try it. And so I'm a big advocate for trying to incorporate some kind of poetic practice or running a poetry workshop or asking these questions in a different way where it feels like the language that you have in an academic setting isn't sufficient, that there's only one way to find out, and it's by having those kinds of alternative practices as well.
Yo, one more round of applause, snaps for our panelists today. Arkin, thank you for coming today. This is where I do my thank yous and thank a few more people as well. So Gutman Library Mayan, who set this up from the beginning, like way back. Mayan had this planned like in August, okay? So thank you for supporting the work and just jumping right on, especially with a book like this. It's very niche that needs to get out there. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who supported us. They're not here anymore, but they were here earlier. Jared, Dory, yeah. Dory's here, yes. And was our like a seamless connection to Dory connected me to Danielle from the Asian American Community Fund from the Boston Foundation. So snaps to Danielle for being here, taking time out of your day. And providing the books that you all are leaving with today. So this would not be possible without our partnership, the trust in the work, right? I am an external presenter. It is a tough time to be a presenter, right? To be teaching and learning, but this is the work, right, that we're doing. And that's why I wanted to get books paid for, because at this moment, y'all are so busy with finals. It's APTA Heritage Month already April, technically, moving into May, which is graduation, which like that's problematic for a lot of Asian Americans because it's like, when do we get our time to shine, ever? So again, don't stick to that timeline, as we say. And again, if we could take a picture before we peace out, I would love to get, for those who want to be part of the picture, up here really quick, take a group photo, and we'll close out.